No. So then we go back to the public agenda,
Yeah, now we are in the public.
which is page what? Man, there's so many pages here.
I think it's page 5.
Thank you.
For the board package, I included everything,
Yeah.
public and closed, in the first agenda so that you can have it accessible, along with PDF numbers so that you can easily access. And I also hyperlink so you
Yes.
can just go back. and
Yes.
forth.
Everybody's coming back.
Mr. Chair, the board is live now. Yes, they're all coming back. I've let them know.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you.
We need a motion to approve the closed session decision.
Yes. So moved.
Moved by Brenda.
Seconded, Carrie.
Carrie, all in favor? Carried. The next item is number 13, CEO's report.
Great. So thank you, Lawrence. I'm going to start my report with a video. When are you gonna put it up?
I think
I can put it up. Hold on a second.
Perfect. Thank you. I did have it ready just in case. But...
A video. Ooh, exciting.
A video, yeah.
Woohoo.
Monique, if you're having trouble, I can play it.
Oh,
No, there it is. Oh,
There's no volume.
there's no volume. Yeah.
You need the volume. You need the sound.
What happened to our sound?
I don't know. Monique, there's no sound.
Monique, do you want me to try with sound?
Yeah,
technology is always fun.
Please try with. Sorry, I couldn't get to my screen. Please try, because I have sound on my end. I'm surprised you don't have sound on your end.
Best intentions.
You first mark the first.
Here we
There we
go.
There
Oh,
I heard sound. Yep.
but now we have no video.
Sounds like a Brenda situation.
Hmm. No luck, Rajni?
Can you not see it?
No,
No.
we could hear it very briefly, but then it went away.
Okay, I'm going to play again.
It's not up on the screen.
Can you see it?
Okay. Yeah,
Oh,
we can
oh,
see it. Oh,
there's-
now it just
oh.
went down.
It
was
came up for a
briefly.
second and went away again.
Oh, these technical things.
I think if you launch it in the browser itself, it probably will play on your side. I think it's when you launch it from.
I'm trying
One
to
of the
launch
drive.
it from the browser.
Okay.
WebEx is very finicky with videos. We did actually do a test on this, believe it or not.
Well, Wendy, you could
It
give it
never
a
worked
try.
out.
Maybe third time is Wendy's. Maybe you could a third time as a
Let me
charm.
get it open here. And at the beginning, let me try.
Okay, Wendy's starting to share.
Can
Okay,
you see it so far?
we can see it.
Just have to find my. Can you hear it?
No.
Okay. All
Oh,
right.
well,
There's a
I
second way
just
to share. I'm going to try sharing it that way. There's I remember there being two ways to share when I've done this before.
the video is going to be very anticlimactic after all of this.
Yeah.
It's such a lovely video too. Oh,
Who did the video? Who compiled the video, Staff?
yes. It was yes, one Matthew Kinch, who's new on our team. He's wonderful. Okay, can everybody see that right now?
Yes, yes.
Can you hear it?
No. So should we just watch it?
Yeah.
When you launch it, Wendy, did you click share the audio and did you click on the optimize for video? And
I don't think it
so when you
actually
hit the
offered
share
me
button, it
Mhm.
should say automatically optimize. You can drop
Yes.
that down and optimize for motion and video, and then share
Oh.
computer audio. Before you hit the screen you want to share, that
Okay,
may help us.
let me try that.
Oh, impressive.
Woohoo.
June 1st marked the
Working?
first day of Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, which will operate and deliver seniors-focused services to the tenants of 83 seniors buildings that were formerly part of Toronto Community Housing. To mark the occasion, TSHC planned launch events at buildings in each of its 4 regions to establish roots within the community. The goal of TSHC will be to ensure tenants are disrupted as little as possible during the transition to the new corporation, with the same employees continuing to offer seniors-focused services. CEO Tom Hunter had the privilege of meeting and interacting with tenants of these buildings as the launch events took place. From lunches with the senior tenants to tree planting events, the launch week was a great success. Local councillors and dignitaries, including Toronto Mayor John Tory, joined the week's events to offer their perspectives and best wishes. TSHC aims to provide seniors-focused social housing and illustrate the City of Toronto's commitment to delivering on the Tenants First plan. We welcome our team of approximately 300 employees to support our nearly 15,000 senior tenants. We are looking forward to helping our seniors stay in their homes, have successful tenancies, and enjoy a better quality of life.
Here we go.
It was worth the wait.
It was short too, so it wasn't too torturous, right? But I think it really captures the spirit of the launch events, and I know I just wanted to add that with the launch events and now with the listening tour, it really has been an opportunity really to engage our tenants in just a more extensive way, and I think there's a lot of meaning to it. It's so, and I think any of you who are there and at this events or talking to the tenants, just and what I'm just hearing is, what they're enjoying about where they are, but also kind of common themes about areas, that we need to work on, how they access their common spaces and the access to funds for summer events, and the other area was with the call center. So I can see areas that this is where we really need to start some focused work. And then it's been interesting to me to really just affirm about the uniqueness of buildings. And the tenants at buildings were stressing different things, right? At one, it may have been security. At one building, there was a real focus on how tenants can access services. And so it just to me, it just helps to confirm what we're hearing through these other more kind of formal consultative processes, and I think will really help as we do, and you'll see throughout today's a meeting, just kind of the work that we're doing, planning, quality work. This will really, I think, be informative as we move through. And so between the launch events and just getting to different, I've been to 10 buildings so far, so 10 out of 83. So I'm getting there. And then also just want to let you know, like, really this transition, just wanting the board to feel confident that we have a situation table in place where almost every day that the staff, the leadership staff are coming together, making sure that we're moving kind of issues forward, addressing issues. And yesterday, for the first time, the steering committee met. So this was the leadership of both corporations to ensure that kind of we are aligned on what the work that we need to do and where we need to go moving forward. So those two kind of more formal meeting points are in place to just to assist in our work. And I also just my final kind of comment for today is just, you know, as we move through to today's agenda, you know, I'm feeling confident that we're hitting on so many of these points that we need to, but, you know, engagement, there's a lot of work right now that's happening around tenant engagement, and even as it relates to kind of the tenant policies, there's those today that we're looking to update and optimize for our tenants. And with many of the operations starting to see, you know, what we need to focus on, vacancy, you know, is an area for us. And then with our staff, the supports that we need to provide to them, you know, and as we hire staff, onboarding, ensuring that they best help us best meet our mandate. So there's a lot, you know, our work right now is very focused, as it should be, you know, on really starting to build out Toronto Seniors. So those are my comments for today.
Move to next item 14. Brenda, do you have any comment?
Just a general comment, and I maybe dealt with some of the reports that are to come. But what struck me was, how are we going to somehow integrate all these tenant engagement activities and outreach and different people doing different levels of tenant engagement? It just struck me that it's, I don't think there's a definitive answer here, but it's just, how do we pull this all together so we can capture the differences that, you know, you mentioned, Tom, the differing perspective, even at the basis of each level, each building. So I guess we need to be sensitized in the sense that no matter what system we come up with or what process we come up with, that we need to be nimble enough to recognize that there are these variations and differences.
Absolutely. And so
I was
I
struck
think,
by that too, Tom, when I went to the buildings, the 4 different buildings, 4 different
Yeah.
fields, 4 different levels of.
yeah, there's a lot of parts, isn't there?
Yeah.
And so I do think, like, certainly with that kind of formulating the role with the director of engagement communication, I think the director of strategy, those two will really help to pinpoint and focus where we want to work. And also, you know, Brenda, the Monday of next week, you know, there's a small team here at Toronto Seniors that's coming together, you know, looking at looking at the plan, what's happening, but then how do we start to map out a plan, right? That helps us to ensure, you know, what is happening, who has that responsibility, what's timing, and then, you know, what are the metrics, what are the outcomes? I think that's important too. We can't lose sight that we're hearing a lot. We need to focus our work, but at the same time, what is the outcome that we're anticipating? And so it is, we're really in, you know, the very beginning a process of organizing, you know, how we, as we hear this feedback, how are we how are we entering it into our plan, incorporating it into the plan? Yeah.
That's good. And also, Tom, you mentioned, was it a meeting of the senior management of the 2 corporations, or?
The steering committee, yes.
I think that got delayed a bit. So you mentioned this was the first meeting of that group?
Right, and this was a commitment out of the transitional agreement, service delivery of the agreement that we have, that this so it really, it's not delayed. This was just part of the follow up and and started, you know, moving forward on the commitments within the agreements.
Well, just as a reminder, certainly there was supposed to be a meeting between board members, between the two boards, and that was discussed last December. So I think it either the busyness of time or the multiplicity of things that had to be done that seemed to have been put off the burner. But so it's both at the board level as well as at the senior management level. Just and even though we're trying to align, make sure we understand that we're also going to be slightly different.
Absolutely.
So I don't want this uniformity. You know, the alignment can often wash out differences. You know.
Yeah.
And
we want a unique culture.
Yeah. Yeah, very different culture. And we're trying to create our own culture, really, in a way.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
Warren?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Any other comments? Then we can move to item 14, planning for success. Mary.
Monique, do you want to share the screen or shall I do it? Great, thank you very much. This item will be fairly quick, but I thought it would be useful for the board to look back a little bit on what we plan to do for the first half of the year and the plan that we have going forward. We are just in the stage that the transition was achieved on June 1st, and we have shifted our planning to post-transition period. And we want to describe the two planning horizons that we have going forward the next few months. And then we will be looking at what we're going to do to get ready for longer term planning. And the purpose of today is to get any input you may have on these things. We have a number of principles related to planning. Tenant and staff input will be key. Reminding ourselves that the TSHC mandate, which we get from the city, will guide our planning and implementation. And the shareholder direction and City of Toronto strategic priorities are extremely important. And that we'll have open and transparent reporting to both staff and tenants. As we plan, and most importantly, as we move into implementation. So we came to you in January with planning phases of three different phases: the transition and immediate follow-up, stabilization and priority improvements, and planning for the future. And this is just a high-level graph of where we're at. I'm going to talk about each of these. So in terms of accomplishments, I think everybody knows, but it's probably worth taking a small moment to recognize what was achieved. Both the transition and service delivery agreements were signed. Service delivery did continue with minimal disruption, and tenants and employees transitioned to TSHC. Throughout it all, there was a lot of engagement with tenants, staff, and partners. And staff access to technology and other operating applications that they needed to do their work was achieved with minimal disruption. Given the timeframes that we had, those are pretty significant achievements. The launch activities on June 1 and beyond were also very successful. And I think since Tom has talked about those things, we can skip to the next slide. As Tom mentioned, the immediate follow-up to transition is proceeding. There is a situation table that meets every 3 days now, or 3 times a week, and the steering committee's been established. The outstanding issue of transition of employee benefits is complete, and I've just provided a few examples of the kinds of things that have come up post-transition that are being addressed. These are, there is never a transition that there are no issues, but these are very manageable issues, let's put it that way, and they are being managed between the two corporations. So the next section of the slide deck looks at the next 3 to 6 months. and in some cases going a little bit over into the new year. And they're divided into two things: stabilization of the organization, and then priority improvements. So stabilization, we have projects related to human resources in terms of the org structure, the leadership team, and employee learning and development. We have a number of finance projects underway in terms of the framework for the budget, financial reporting, and some line of credit. Also related to stabilization on the next slide, there are a number of things related to information technology, stabilizing the current environment and starting to work on the impediments, the IT impediments to moving towards a lease agreement and getting the required IT governance framework in place. We have work that we need to do in terms of the lease agreement, including determining the target timing and making sure that we understand an operating agreement with the city and getting that lease agreement drafted. I think from a timing point of view, it is likely to be longer than we had originally hoped, maybe up to the end of March. And there's still a lot of work being done on communications and engagement. And I think quite a bit of that will come up when we hear the stack report on the developing the engagement plan. And as Tom mentioned, we do have the 100-day priorities, and we are beginning to do the work on implementing those priorities that we've committed to. And the last activity related to, or there's a few more related to stabilization, getting the health and wellness initiatives continuing to develop, a number of things in that area. And as you know, we talked about policy and process review. In terms of policy, the priority is looking at the tenant-facing policies on what the priorities for that are and how we're going to get tenant input. But there are other policies that we adopted on an interim basis that have to be looked at in the next few months. And finally, my personal favorite, data and reporting. It's not really my personal favorite, but we have a lot of pieces going on data and reporting, and they're a little bit disjointed. So we're going to be spending some time over the next few months pulling together all the reports that we're currently doing, looking at the data that we have. Do we have the data that we need? And how are we going to use that data to report to the board, for the leadership of the organization, and contribute to assessing what we need to be doing with respect to service improvement. So there's a fair bit of work to be done there. So those are the things that we need to be doing in the next 6 months to stabilize the organization and deliver on our what we've called the 100-day priorities, or our service delivery priorities. And there's lots of work to be done there. While we're doing that, we're going to be planning for longer-term planning, and particularly for the development of an integrated strategic plan, tenant-centric service plan, and branding. And the idea that we have here is that we will do preparation between now and October, and then begin the strategic planning process after that. And we really need to be doing some thinking about how we want to do the planning, how much engagement we want to have, how we're going to work with the city and ensure that the city priorities are included in that process, and determine whether we need some external resources to help, and bring that approach to the board for your approval. Clearly, strategic planning is one of the major activities and responsibilities of the board, so we think you'll want to be involved in discussing how that should take place, and we will work with the quality and tenant engagement committee on that. And we are thinking that perhaps it would be a good idea to have an orientation session of the board before the board meeting in September to have a thorough discussion of how the planning, of how strategic planning and related things would proceed. And then following that, we would actually begin to actually launch and implement a strategic planning process. And the idea would be that we would have a strategic plan and key initiatives, very importantly, the key initiatives associated with that plan, ready about mid-year next year, so that if it has any budget impact, it can be fed into the budget process. So that's just a very high overview of the planning that we have been doing to keep things moving in terms of delivering on the commitments of the organization, both in the immediate and slightly longer term. Happy to answer any questions, comments.
Just a comment on the data gathering and trying to get some handle on that. Mary, either yourself or your committee or whoever's going to be handling this, I think I'd like to ask the question of where you seem to be gathering a lot of data, but to what end? Like, what are we hoping to demonstrate or prove, or to show improvement or success, whatever metrics you want to call it. So I'd like it at some point that we have some clarity given to us as a board as to why we're gathering all this data and to what end. You know, so for example, vacancy rates, what do they mean for us? You know, is it a sign of a high turnover? Is it a sign of unhappiness? Is it a sign of natural progression due to age and disability and death? You know, I look at these things and these charts and wondering, well, what is it telling me? You know, so I can appreciate everyone's doing data gathering for slightly different reasons, but if there can be some coherence, I'd appreciate that. As a decision maker on the board, when I see facts, I'd like to know to what end, why were they gathered, and how will that help or influence our decision making?
Yeah, when the plan that we're hoping to put in place will have a number of really important steps to it. So first of all, you have to figure out if you have the data that you need, but the really important piece is moving to analysis. And what is it telling you, and how do you want to use what you learn to set your priorities and make improvements? And we know that service improvement or service excellence can be really helped if you have good data to try to figure out what's really going on that you're trying to fix. So I completely agree with you, Brenda.
Yeah. And my final comment is on the strategic planning process. In a way, it's important that we don't lose sight of it or delay too long in it, because in a sense, the decisions you make and the broad directions and visions that you create in your strategic planning process should inform our decision making and our operational decision making. So in a sense, it's a little topsy-turvy here that we're moving ahead because of the reality of time before our strategic understanding is in place. So I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of the importance of the timeliness of that process. I think it's very, very important to set our framework and our guidelines for the future. And let's not lose sight of it and I don't want to wait till next year, you know. And we as a board, I appreciate your suggestion of the orientation on strategic planning. I would support that. I would say as a board, we haven't really had a chance to address any of those questions, and I feel that loss myself. So if we could have a board orientation session, I think that would be very good. Good idea.
Linda.
Thank you, Mary. That was, it was a really good overview. And I'm reminding myself that it's June 30th and we've actually only really been a corporation for 30 days. And even though I feel like I'm often feeling like we're behind, we're actually ahead as well because of all the work that's been done. I think for me, strategic planning is only good if it's actually the right process. And I agree with you, Brenda. I think we have to start the strategic planning process, but we actually have to make sure that we have a really top-notch process that is actually really informed by our tenants. because we want this first strategic plan and key initiatives to actually be reflective of the many, many layers of tenant engagement and performance. We want to be a high performing organization that understands the metrics that we're actually collecting. So I would just say that actually how we do that strategic plan for me is actually really critical, because I've been through many processes where you either end up with a great strategic plan that becomes your compass forward, or it's a lot of work and you don't, and it's on a shelf somewhere. So I think that it does actually merit us actually making sure that we get the right process in place, and that we're all engaged with that and clear on what the outcomes that we're looking at. And I think the fall makes sense, and to actually really engage in that, because it's going to be hard to actually have all of the information and all of the people available to do this. We want to have some of your key new people involved in this, because it's also something that we're going to be, as directors, overseeing the strategic plan and accountable for it, but our staff are going to have to execute for us. So it's important to me. So, but thanks for the thorough report, Mary, like usual.
And outside stakeholders is not just tenants, but there's a lot of expectation of put on our shoulders from outside stakeholders and what they're hoping to do. And it was very clear in the consultations we did to date is they want to see some innovation and want us to be leaders. I remember that was one of the quotes. So in any strategic process,
exactly.
The stakeholders can be broad and varied.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we need to actually give time to actually get that, so we have some information, but we, like for me, that's the first part of a good strategic plan, is making sure that you actually get the input from the stakeholders.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to comment on that, that's exactly what we would be coming to the committee and then to the board with, on how do you want to go about doing this? And the biggest driver of the biggest driver of strategic planning is what you decide to do on engagement. And so that will be a discussion. It's the driver of how much input you get, but also time and cost. So the more you think about how you want to do it, and do you want to do thought leader input? Do you want to do jurisdictional scans? Like, there's a lot of options about how you can go about doing it. And those are precisely the kind of things that I see us working on, some options and bringing forward to the board.
Thanks. Mary, I have a question on slide 8. There's a reference to funding shortfall.
I saw that.
Oh, you know what? That we don't have one, actually. Norm, when I first put this together, thought that we might have to be worrying about that. But my most recent conversation with him is that he thinks we're fine till the end of the year.
We have already received the funding.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I should have updated it after.
Thank you.
He told me that. Oh, good catch.
Okay, shall we move to the next item then? Quality and Tenant Engagement Committee report by Linda, followed by a deputation from Bill.
Great. I'll just get things started, and I think actually make a few comments, and then I think we would the normal process would be to actually have the deputation before we actually go into the report. But I'm very pleased to say that we had a very good detailed meeting on June 13th, our Quality and Tenant Engagement Committee meeting. And at that meeting, 3 really important reports were brought forward by city staff for our consideration. And thank you for some of the board members who aren't actually member of our committee for joining us for that, and for all the work that was actually done to pull those reports together. We considered the staff recommendations on tenant engagement. We also received a preliminary report from the Seniors Health and Wellness Initiative, which was an update from Health Commons. And we had an update from the city, as requested from our committee, on understanding their role in ISM moving forward. And I'm pleased to provide an update on all of these reports and today for information. And I hope that everyone had a chance to read all of the reports, because in some ways, I think that for me, they all link together. And if you have a question about, stack, it might actually be like some of the pieces actually may be answered later on in terms of some of the other reports. So these 3 reports are actually very linked in my mind. The stack report, I must say that we were delighted to receive the anticipated report from stack, designed to inform TSHC tenant engagement tabled through the city. And thank you for all the work of Paul and others in pulling that together. The report was rich with ideas, which we appreciated. 2 staff members deputated on the report, mentioning that there was divergence on the content presented and that all staff members did not have sufficient time to review or provide input. And this is actually one of those, in some ways, the conversation we were just having about speed and engagement sometimes don't go hand in hand. We really wanted to see this report. We probably didn't have all staff members probably didn't have enough time to review it. So we take that that information and welcome it. Some board committee members noted that the clear next steps were missing from the report, as was any mention of the governance structure for tenant engagement. So it was a report, as you could see, on the principles, and it didn't have a very a prescribed method of how you were going to get there. It was also requested that a current state of tenant engagement based on what the transition was from TCHC to TSHC on June 1st be provided to the board. And I'm pleased to provide an update to the board on these items and associated requests that were brought forward at the June 13th QTE meeting, and some of them were in the package. We thank the staff members and facilitator Joy for preparing the report under the leadership of the city staff and all of the city staff that were involved with this. I will assume that all the board members have had a chance to review the report and will therefore move to update to my update. We both have the facilitator and the city staff present to answer questions that you may have after the report. And the QTA board members considered the report and spent a great deal of time discussing it at our meeting. Here are some next steps that can help us move this important work forward on the discussion at the meeting. I would like to recommend the following, and then we'll go to Bill. As I noted, there were 2 deputations at the QTE committee meeting stating that staff members did not feel that they had sufficient time to review the report. We would like to ask our colleagues at the city to consider extending timelines for receipt and review of the report for all staff members by their next meeting, which I believe is in July. It's really important that the people that are involved in this report have had a enough fulsome time to actually review. Second, once all staff members have had a chance to review the report, we would like to ask TSHC to work with the city to gather staff and tenant leaders together to identify priority areas in the report. While the report is rich with principles, methods, and ideas, it was clear from our discussion that we need to focus on finessing a few key priority areas for input. It's not feasible to consult with all tenants on such a large document in a very short period of time. Thirdly, as part of the work to prioritize the areas for action, it would be incumbent upon us as a board to also consult with tenants more broadly. We would like to ask TSHC and the city staff to work with STAC and tenant leaders to design a seniors-focused consultation process that TSHC can deliver on in the fall of 2022. More engagement is necessary. All of this work will contribute to building our new tenant engagement system. At our meeting, the issue of governance was brought up as it relates to STAC. It has been confirmed that STAC will continue with the city until at least the year end. Through collaboration, the staff teams at both the city and TSHC will work together to support STAC. With all that said, if there's agreement with the next steps presented, I would then like to ask the board to accept for information, after we hear from Bill, the STAC report on tenant engagement, and then we can actually move on to the other. I think I'll parcel it out, and we'll have some more brief remarks on the other 2 reports that are also included in your package. But I think, Mr. Chair, I think we probably should have Bill's deputation at this point.
Bill?
Sure. If you're ready for Mr. Lohman, I'll connect him.
Yeah.
Mr. Lohman, go ahead.
Yes.
Welcome, Bill.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Hunter, and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard on topics before this body today. My name is Bill Lohman. I've been listening to what's been going on, and I have to say that I am in full agreement with everything that I've been hearing. I think the reports, both reports have a lot to say, and I appreciate the conversation about needing to read them thoroughly. This board has been piecing together the financial requirements and the legal structures to incorporate the seniors housing. And today is, I believe, is the first fully incorporated meeting of the new Seniors Housing Corporation. So congratulations for all the hard work that's been done up to this point. This board needs to ensure the commitment to review this with STAC, all tenant-facing policies and procedures that migrated from Toronto Housing, as repeatedly noticed and promised. We've been hearing management for some time state that were unable to affect any tenant recommended changes because Toronto Housing controls the process and staff's hands were tied until June 1. There was a lot of coordination and planning that went into commemorating this official launch of the new corporation and the Putting Down Roots project. I've yet to see any conversation or staff enthusiasm for brainstorming solutions with tenants to identify community issues and building problems or to address that staff-tenant communication divide. What are staff doing to reconcile the chasm created by the one-sided approach that was originally put into place that did not consider it, did not have seniors at the table? There was no quick and easy. There was a lot of coordination and planning that has gone into this, but there's no quick and easy hack for building relationships of trust that are vital to collaboration and that's required for the integrated service model success. And it is an age-old process that starts with a smile, a positive effort, and successful outcomes. Just like loonies being squirreled away in a piggy bank for a special summer excursion. Each loonie adds value to the bank. It's the same process for building trust. Instead of coins adding the value, it is the deposits of goodwill, success that grow credibility and trust. To create something enduring, we need to come together around inspiration, and teamwork is key. And the grand vision that we all look forward to must, in their engagement process, must attract other tenants that have ambition and talent to commit energy, to help lay down the solid groundwork for a prototype where the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts. There was a trove of insight and concerns that were raised by STAC and focus groups over the past year and a half that were not included into these reports that do warrant further reading and follow-up. Things like staff accountability to tenants and staff collaboration on the engagement process. Toronto Housing worked collaboratively with senior management to transition and institute housing policies and with an institutional ethos into the new Seniors Corporation. However, the City Council mandate for STAC inclusion, input, and influence to ensure a seniors lens was ignored outright. The engagement refresh team never came back to the table after July 2019 and showed no interest to alter the youth-focused model to accommodate senior-specific needs. What are the plans for realigning the tenants don't need to know approach of Toronto Housing and in the training that has gone into the staff? How is that going to change? And we're talking about city strategic priorities. Well, so far, those priorities, they ignored the main stakeholder in this process, tenants. So I'm very glad to see that there is a strong effort now to make this realignment so tenants are involved and so that this process has a chance to be successful. And just a further point, when you're looking through these reports, just on item 16B on attachment 2, page 53 of 71 or 163 of 223, where it's talking about programs and partnerships pre and post COVID. It says all community rooms are now open to informal tenant use. Well, the truth of the matter is that's not true at all.
Oh, yeah.
So these are things, what's written in a report is not always what is happening on the ground. So I think there needs to be, the addition of tenant consultations in the process, where it talks about tenant consultation process before any agency-led programs or services will be brought back into the common areas. Well, there has been no tenant consultation about this process, and yet agencies are coming back into the common areas. So, let's get on the same page here, folks. And I would hope, and what I've heard from this board so far, is that we are on the same page here. And what needs to change is the approach and the actions of staff in their direct relationship to tenants. So if we can do that, I think we will be very successful, and we will have a model that can be a prototype for other cities. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Bill. Any questions for Bill? Linda, sorry, Carrie?
He hit the nail on the head.
Thank you very much, Bill. It's actually really helpful that you're keeping us on track with this, and that I think we're aligned as a board with many of the tenant leaders who are working towards the same. So I guess Lawrence, back to the report. Would you is there any other comments on the report, or do we want to actually have an approval for information for this first report before we go on to the Health Commons update, where I have a few remarks as well? And I see we have some guests with us from Health Commons.
Brenda.
I did read all the reports here, and the tenant engagement principles and methods. Lots of good information here, but I can't get a sense, was there any specific recommendations, or this is just a factual recitation of the process to date? Like there are different methods here. Are we saying we are supporting these methods? Are we saying we are going to choose these methods?
And did you want to speak to this? I think you were at the meeting, Brenda, and that's exactly why we're sending it back to STAC for some further clarification on the next steps. But Wendy, did you want to comment?
Yeah. Yeah, I think these were some of the recommendations, and the idea is to get together with STAC and other tenant leaders to identify sort of the priorities within those recommendations, because there's a variety of them, and we did hear there was some divergence on some of those as well. So we want to have a further conversation on what to prioritize, taking out to the broader tenant body to get further input, and then to focus in from there. So they've basically provided sort of a menu to choose from. So we've tried to narrow that menu and then go out to the broader tenant group to identify further into the governance and methods and whatnot. So that's the idea.
Well, my only concern here is there's a lot here. And I find when you consult with people, if there's too much, it's too overwhelming and they miss the forest for the trees, right? Yeah. So we have to be very careful and respectful how we consult with people. So it's a meaningful consultation and not just pro forma. But also so that it can result in meaningful consultation, meaningful outcomes. I don't know, how can you prioritize 24 methods. Maybe a greater person than myself can do this, but I just want to be, yes, we need some time for Stack and other people to review this, but just maybe even an abridgment of it, maybe even, you know, a separation from the narrative, each of the points that could be put on a separate sheet of paper so that people can meaningfully engage. That's my first point. And the second point is related to the staff, the issue of staff and trust and building trust. It's the old thing of, you know, it's hard to build trust, but once it's ruined, it's very hard to build it back, right? And I wondered, I don't know, do you have any HR people on this phone call? I've been stressing and had asked many times about staff training and development, and I'm kind of keen on this because I think it's one of the ways that you can create an ethos, a philosophy of service. I know we've done some training for the senior service coordinators, but I think it might be worthwhile to kind of review staff training and development, skill set building. Not everyone knows how to do consultation. Not everyone knows how to meet with people in a group format, right? And I mean, it's an actual skill. I used to run a program for prenatal, and all based on groups, right? And there were public health nurses who were leading them. Well, public health nurses are not trained in group consultation and group work. And I was a placement coordinator, so you know, the students came to my agency, and we would have to train them on how do you meet with people, how do you talk to them, how do you engage particularly disadvantaged people in a process. So I just want to highlight the HR aspect here, and whether it's skill training workshops or whether it's philosophy of service workshops, but as one way of trying to build that core understanding that this is a new way of viewing things and doing things. And that may be one way we can get at the beginning building steps of building trust. Because, you know, we can all talk fancy and come up with great recommendations, but I think it often boils down to some fairly simple steps. And thank you to, is it Joy? Was her name Joy?
Yeah. Thanks, Brenda. And I think that this document actually can be a foundational document for that.
Yeah.
You know, I think that it is, you know, it's probably a bigger document that, and I'm sure that Tom and his whole team will be looking at it in terms of the principles that we want to engage with in the training and with actually onboarding new staff.
Yeah, no, it's a great report. She did a very difficult, very good job.
Lawrence, are we able to ask for approval for information on this one? Because we have some next steps in terms of it going back to Stack. And this is not the last time you're going to see tenant engagement. I think that this is actually all of these are, you know, kind of, this will be ongoing work.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah.
For information purposes.
So do you need a motion or?
I think we do for information, right?
Yeah.
Normally.
Not really, only for approval.
Okay.
No.
Okay, perfect. I always get that. So maybe I'll move on to the Health Commons update then, just to actually set the stage for this one. So this one is, I want to make sure that that this is actually a preliminary report. And Sophia's here. We don't have 30 minutes allocated for this. It's actually part of a larger agenda. So, but we do want to actually, and we, you know, I am reporting that this actually has come through QTE, where we actually, the Quality Tenant Engagement Committee. I think it's really good to actually get the board engagement, but I don't think we should always be repeating everything from one committee to the next. But and many people were there, but we're looking for input for sure. So through the city, just as a reminder, Health Commons provided an update at our June 13th meeting on the Seniors Health and Wellness Initiative project, which was previously the Hubs. This project, so it's a small slice of the tenant engagement piece. This project, but we're getting some wonderful feedback from folks on this. So this project is focused on asking tenants what services and supports they need to meet their health and wellness needs. The presentation that was sent to you shares data gathered through many consultations, some in languages other than English, done with tenants and staff members, and a final, more detailed report will be presented in the fall. At the meeting, it was requested that Health Commons provide the context that was driving their work, as this was not clearly articulated in the June 13th presentation. Health Commons has updated their materials to reflect that request, and they will share an update with the board at this point. They are using this opportunity to also get input for us as they present. And maybe Lawrence, as the chair, you can advise Sophia how you would like to proceed. And Wendy, are you helping with this one as well?
I think Andrea is actually going to give
oh, thanks, Andrea. I can't
the introduction.
keep track of the room. Thank you.
No, I was just going to turn it over to Sophia Akura from Health Commons. Is that all right with everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, and I just want to make sure everybody can see the slides now.
Yes.
Okay, great. You'll see me looking off to the corners just because I'm flipping sides while we're speaking. So just if I could get clarification about how much time do we have?
We have got some 8 to 9 minutes, 8 minutes.
9 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
9 minutes. Okay. I'll be quick then. So if that's the case, then I'm not going to go through the entire report. I would like to just actually maybe anchor this interim sort of check-in with the board in the broader conversation. So it's very helpful for us to be able to listen in to the discussion as the board is grappling with exactly the place that you're in right now, which is the beginning of a transformation journey. And I think pulling in a lot of information around the best ways to engage seniors so that you can really anchor your strategy centered in the experience and needs of seniors. And so I think what you will find in the report, in this interim report that we're providing to you, is in some ways a bit of framing, a little bit more language. So I know that you have an excellent report on engagement and engagement strategies. I think that some of the findings that we are sharing with you today, the themes that have been emerging from our conversations with seniors, may also be helpful for further framing out, your decision making with STAC around how you're going to proceed with the engagement. And so just a couple of things that I think are important to note, because we heard a lot of the same themes emerge in our conversations as those that were raised by Tom when he did the building by building visit. Security issues were coming up, questions around pest control, but also, the necessity for really focusing on broader well-being. So this is just a sort of a check-in with you around the themes that have been emerging from the consultations. We've had a sort of an emergent objective with this consultation that has been shaped a little bit by the process and by what we heard from STAC and senior tenant leaders. And so we will be taking our early themes and findings to STAC in July for their feedback and their input around where to focus. And then the final report will be coming to the board in the fall. So just very quickly, I think it is critical to acknowledge that this project had really evolved from the place where the initial question was, how do seniors tenants want to receive services, and where do they want to receive them? And that objective has really grown in substantial ways to be a much more inclusive question around how do seniors think about wellness, and what are they looking for from this process. I want to thank the STAC members who participated through this process. So initially, I think we were tasked with engaging them, but we heard a real desire to be collaborators with us. So we changed our process fairly substantially and brought on board 10 STAC members who joined us through the work. We had 17 meetings between April and the end of May with those STAC members, and they helped us with everything from recruitment strategies for the engagement to the insight generation. So they have been very embedded in the process. And I think that has really given us a much deeper set of insights and a better anchoring for how to share back what we were learning. I think, I did note that we moved off of that very specific question around how do services want to receive, or how do seniors want to receive their services, to a bigger question around what does wellness mean for you? And we were looking at that question in the context of where the Seniors Housing Corporation is today, recognizing that you are beginning a transformational journey and that you are looking for, with the same set of buildings, the same set of tenants, and many of the same staff, ways to really signal this transformational change, a real change that will feel different for seniors in the building, different for staff as well, and the Housing Corporation kind of step out on the right foot. One of the things I think is important to raise for you is that the process of engagement itself is an engine for wellness. So if the question is, how do we improve the sense of wellness for seniors? Part of it is in the way that you engage with seniors. So I'm going to talk quickly about the process because I know we had some questions around who do we speak to and who shaped the findings that are in here, and then I'll go as quickly as I can to some of the findings. Just to provide you with an overview, we did talk to 87 individual seniors, some of them multiple times. They lived across 35 of the buildings in 4 regions. There was many languages represented, and the engagement of the design of the engagement and the recruitment of seniors into this process was guided by advice from STAC. We had over 28 different ethnicities, as well as different identities and experiences that were reflected there. Everything from, education level to languages spoken, to sexual orientation, to life experience. 24 of the 87 seniors were able to provide input in a language other than English, so in their own language. And over the course of the last 4 months, we did 10 focus groups, 22 coffee chats with tenants, and 22 one-on-one deep dive interviews. Just to reassure you, there was very broad representation beyond STAC. So we did look to STAC, but also staff and tenants in the buildings to help us identify seniors who are seen as leaders in their building because of their level of activity and the ways in which they are engaging. So just to give you some comfort that we definitely have, I think, gone broad but very, very deep. The intention here was not to touch as many seniors as we could, but to really listen very deeply and look for repetition and patterns in what we were hearing from folks. Certainly, I think the most important message that I think we can bring to you today is that when we asked about wellness, what we heard back in overwhelmingly, the key pattern was the importance of being heard and the importance of being seen and valued. And I've heard that in this conversation today. How are you going to embed the principles of engagement in every step of your journey as you develop a senior-centered service plan, as you develop a senior-centered strategic plan? And we certainly have some thoughts about how you might pack that around the consultations on the service planning, but actually maybe more generally around how you approach the development of things like the structures around accountability and ongoing collaboration with seniors. So I'm gonna just speak very quickly because I think I know I don't have a lot of time and I wanted to get through a few pieces. We heard about the importance of wellness from seniors very clearly, really being a broad range of things. And one of the things that I want to reassure the board of is that while their definition of wellness is very broad, we also heard really clearly that tenants are willing to become part of the solution. So they are a real critical asset in buildings. There are staff there, but there are also tenants who are very willing to run seniors, programs for seniors and, activities for engagement that are by tenants for tenants. And so while the definition of wellness is huge, and it does include in there a service plan and some specific directions around services, where they should be delivered and how they should be delivered, there's certainly a willingness to tap into this very broad set of assets, the seniors that bring their life skills and their willingness to participate. So overall, the big emerging themes and action areas, I think I would just start by saying that culture is the most critical piece. And especially at this stage in your journey, as you're just launching into something that is intended to feel new. There will be lots of people looking to see whether or not there's evidence of a change. They're looking for relationship building and trust. So the step out in terms of how you do this work, how you proceed with engagement, we cannot underscore more how critically important that is. There are definitely practical needs that have been surfaced and urgent and emergent needs that have been surfaced, and we'll share some of those. There's also an interest in doing more tenant-led activities, and there was a lot of conversation in our theming around the use of the living spaces. So Bill talked about common areas and how they're thought of by the tenants, and the ways in which discussions around those common areas can and should be approached when it comes to service delivery in those spaces. We also heard in some of the action areas that there are ways of layering in the services into the individual units, into the building, and into the neighborhood. And in consultation with seniors, you will be able to get a roadmap for how best to sort of layer those services into geography. They talked a lot about which key supports and in which places. And then finally, I think it's important to talk about accountability. And what we heard from them was a real sense of vulnerability and feeling unsafe, and the ways in which accountability processes can help to address some of those challenges. So I talked a little bit about the necessity to start out on the right track around culture and trust building. And I think whatever happens in this process, it is very important to sort of hold, I think, in your minds that many of the processes that have been carried out have really, I think, in many ways felt like they exacerbated the problems of ageism and disrespect. So the necessity for starting out and feeling fresh and new is important. Seniors talked about the fact that there's a lot of stigma in living in social housing, but that, you know, many people landing in social housing is really just a twist of fate. And so this came out, I think, a lot. There's a real sense of grieving around feeling disrespected, not feeling heard or like their perspectives matter. So as you go out, and I think Tom going building to building and speaking directly with tenants is a critical first start. As I said, tenants are ready and able to contribute. They are willing to bring their talents, their life experience, and their resources as their time to those spaces. But what they did ask for was, and I think Tom, you also mentioned this, a little more ease with which they can engage in this. So they're willing to do programming, but what they did talk about was how difficult it is to actually, you know, even set out that process, filling out many forms that feel inaccessible. I'm not having a real clarity around the stability of what funding is available for activities internally. So they are willing to contribute, but they do, I think, need to have on the other side of that some ease around the process. I'll talk a little bit about the critical issues that they had identified. Many of you are already aware of these, I'm sure, but you know, I think I see the folks that are on the board, and I know that I wouldn't, and neither would you, be able to tolerate the level of pestilence in the building. So they talked about bed bugs and cockroaches and rats, secondhand smoke, disruptive substance use, mental health crises, violence in the buildings, elder abuse, and people dying behind closed doors alone. And those are happening every day. And then when we think about the order of priorities that need to be tackled, the quality of the conversation is one, and in equal parts, beginning to make meaningful improvements in these spaces are really important for starting to build trust. I heard Bill speak about living spaces and common areas. So we heard as a theme very commonly that common areas are important extensions of the small spaces that people are living in. And they want to be, they feel that it is their right, and they want to be, and it is, they want to be part of the conversation around how those common spaces are used. So I will say that, you know, we often get asked, what did people say about hubs? We never asked the question specifically, do you want integrated service hubs in the common spaces of your buildings? But what I can also say is that at no point in these consultations, in any of the conversations, did people describe a hub as the ideal solution. So there was willingness to have services in those buildings, but the request was begin with a conversation around how many days will those service providers be in that space, a discussion about who will have access to them. Safety came up very regularly. I'm sure that's not going to be surprising for people. And I think many people felt that they were unsafe in the building, and opening up the building to the broader neighborhood would really exacerbate that challenge. They also talked about this sort of feeling that there is a poor absence response to threats of violence or unsafety in the buildings. So important to bring those things forward. I recognize that we're almost out of time. So I guess, you know, what you'll see in the notes that we have shared that there's even more specific information. I think, Brenda, you talked about the need for a really cohesive engagement plan that allows for maybe a principles-based approach. I'm sure this is what the engagement report also shares, where you have a standardized way of going out, but there is a real recognition of what is hyperlocal. There is some ability to group together buildings, but that grouping should come from the perspective of the tenants, because what you'll hear from them is maybe people never cross that road, or we do see commonalities between these buildings. It feels reasonable to group us together. But I think grouping at the region level would not give you the level of granularity that's required in order to reassure people that you are really meeting their specific needs. I talked a bit about the layering of supports in the different levels in the unit, in the building, in the neighborhood. There are many service providers coming in and out of these buildings to go to the units, so that's already happening. And there is opportunity to potentially have some services at the building level, but I think having that sort of negotiated through a framework with the tenants in the building is really critical. And certainly they are interested in having services at a hub in the neighborhood, where they and all the other citizens and residents of the neighborhood can access services. They have some specific requests around accessibility, but I think that's nothing surprising there. And I talked about the request for mechanisms around accountability. So there was a real desire for some standardization around response times when a complaint or a request is issued, access to staff when needed, and then I think the quality of interactions. So some training around anti-ageism and destigmatization may go a long way in helping to improve the quality of those conversations. So I don't know if I still have time. I'm sorry, I can't see the group.
Go ahead.
Please take it.
Sure.
Okay, that's great. So we have the start of what I think is a roadmap for change. The urgent piece is really fixing what's not working. And we talked about those urgent problems, the complaints process that allows you to sort of prioritize some of the challenges that are happening in the building with pest control, mediation for tenant and tenant issues. Translation services also are critical if you're going to have an effective complaints process, and then the maintenance issues. But then the other piece, which is quite urgent, is really just understanding each building. I think somebody talked about the fact that, the Seniors Housing Corporation may be a family, but each building is like a kid and they're all different and they all have different sort of needs. And I think taking that seriously and figuring out how to create quite a specific strategy in each. And I think that can be done with some very effective engagement tools that really allow you to map out in a standardized way this conversation and this conversation with this level of granularity. I think part of it is also about arriving at a common set of goal statements and then some criteria that will help you prioritize. In terms of game changers, because you're starting on a really long journey, we wanted to share these because we see these steps as potentially ways of structurally embedding tenant voice and well-being into the process. So the first thing that is, I think, easier to do is really ensuring some predictable funding for tenant-led activities, and some easier processes around how they can get those things started. There's willingness to do that, and that will go a really long way in creating, social connectivity and a network of people in the building that are supporting each other. Knowledge sharing and creation by tenants for tenants. So as but tenants have a lot of information around how to navigate systems and how to age well in place, and they can share those with each other. But I think the first step is creating the opportunities for those interactions. Local tenant planning councils and roundtables are hopefully part of the engagement strategy that you're beginning to roll out. And then over time, having ways that the networks in the different groupings across the system can connect to each other and share, what's working, and learn from each other. It's a way of sort of activating the real knowledge and expertise that lives in these buildings. I think what we want to leave with you is the very clear message in what we saw in spades is that seniors are the experts in their own lives, and they can really help you make some decisions around the difficult prioritization exercise that is in front of you. And if you go to tenants, while there's no shortcut to listening, we often say this at the lab, there is no shortcut to listening, but listening is the shortcut. you will find that you don't get set back because you didn't understand the assignment based on the perspectives of the people that live there. So hopefully we can just close it out there with that message. I think that's probably the most important. Just wanted to remind you of our process. So we will be going to the STAC working group with the draft of the final report for their feedback. We will finalize. This is just a very sort of slim view of all the information that Sonia and Cassandra have collected. We'll be finalizing a fairly comprehensive report and submitting that to the Seniors Housing Corporation Board in September. And that's it. So I hopefully there's time for you to give us some feedback around what you would like to see emphasized, or if there's more information that you're interested in that we can share. Sorry if I went over.
Thanks so much, Sophia. And just to say that this is a preliminary report, but what's even come to us since the last meeting has been substantially deepened. And I have to say that actually, this is a lot. You said it, Sophia, that this is not so much about the hub anymore. It's actually getting another form of feedback on why it was important to look at the 3 reports together. And also that this is actually a gift to our strategic planning process, I think, and to a new staff group, because I think we're getting much more from an organization that is actually not embedded in TCHC or TSHC. Carrie, you wanted to comment though?
Yeah, thank you. Sophia, your report is absolutely excellent. It is amazing how you've gone from the last couple of conversations to this. It's so thoughtful. It is a good chunk for us for strategic planning, and to have started with to hub or not to hub and get to this point is just brilliant. And it proves, like, once again, that no one can look at a map and say, this makes sense based on what we see on the map, whether it's groupings or any type of alignments. You really have to dig down deeper to see what the individual requirements are. So you presented that beautifully. So thank you so much for your excellent report.
So hi, Linda. I have Bill Lohman who would want to comment. Would you like him to join right now?
Sure. I think he had said that he wanted to depute on this. Please feel free. Actually, Lawrence, I'm stepping into your chairing role. I'm sorry. It's kind of an overlap of the role. So feel free to answer that question.
No, this is critical issue.
Yeah.
Mr. Lohman, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And hi once again. I just very shortly want to say I am very pleased with Sophia's report and Sonia's work here. It does, as I stated earlier, it does really speak to the diverse needs that we have in our seniors communities. But it also provides an opportunity here to collect some of these ideas and to create a sort of an overarching process where there can be some accountability. And I had mentioned earlier in this process that is something that the STAC could possibly be a part of, in terms of being a communication nexus between from the buildings and tenant councils and up to the Quality Tenant Engagement Committee. And so there is a framework that I believe can give the support and provide accountability and develop metrics that you need, but at the same time provide some discretion for each community as they need it. And so I'm just very pleased with the progress of this report, and thank you very much.
The good news is this is not the last that we're going to hear from this wonderful team, Lawrence. So I think we're asking for information, and I think that there's ongoing opportunity to give feedback. Brenda, do you want to add? I'm just looking at the time as well.
Yeah. in a sense, we're moving from the specific to the general. We're no longer just looking at hubs, and which is good. But I think it also reveals, it kind of ties in with our strategic planning discussion we had. In a sense, what is grounding all this? And we've missed that step. And I think the thing that I picked up reading all this stuff is the sense of we need to build community. These are people's homes, okay? So I would like to suggest at some point we look at a community development model as a way of proceeding. So with a community development model, you can have development of local leadership, local participation, and local management. I mean, I like to put out ideas and dreams, but there's no reason why we can't view buildings as being self-managed entities in the future. Not unlike co-op housing as an example, where you have the residents and tenants in the building running the building they live in. Now that's a bit of a step, I understand, and lots of steps before that. But I think we have to ground all this discussion in some of this philosophical policy strategic framework. And so we're kind of doing a parallel run here, two trains, so to speak, on two different tracks. Now, in relation to hold on, so I just made a note here. So it would explain and ground things like relationship building. Why are we building relationship? Well, we're building relationship because it's a functional reason. It's practical, but it also builds in and feeds into this notion of building community. So I'd like to kind of ground some of this. Now, one point that's missing here, and you run the risk of when you generalize, you miss the specifics, is I've always felt the hub model as envisioned and presented initially is what I call a bureaucratic dream. It's a box you can tick off. You know, we have a hub in this location, we serve so many people, so many hours of service. And that's not quite what we need. And one of my concerns is, and this is where you do need some specific professional talent and skill in looking at models of service. Okay, we still have not addressed the fact, and this has been my experience, no one wants to talk about their declining state. But if we're talking about aging in place, then we have to meaningfully look at some health-related and personal care services. This to me is jurisdictionally very difficult, trying to deal with the LHINs or whatever they call themselves now. So, you know, I don't want to lose sight that there are some real specific things that will need to be built into this work. And healthcare and personal care, often people don't reflect on that because no one wants to think of their demise and ill health. But I think we mustn't lose sight of that, because if we're thinking of aging in place and people viewing this as their home forever, then we're going to have some real specific services like that negotiated with our community partners and outside agencies. So I appreciate the work that's been done, very insightful comments. But I don't want to lose the specificity, and I don't want to miss the forest for the trees, right? And but grounding this notion of community and community development as a process, I think might help us in understanding this. And that relates to the tenant funds, which I want to recommend be raised significantly from the $1,000. If KBER can have 5,000, why can't we? And to streamline the process for people to access that funds. I mean, I'm just overwhelmed by the multiple levels of paper.
Put that as an action for another agenda item, Brenda, because I think we don't want to lose sight of that. I see Sophia's hand up, and I do actually want to point out that some of the health issues are actually contained in the next report, which is ISM. So the specifics around how we actually do those pieces. But Sophia, do you want to last comment?
Just very quickly, I think what I will say is the way that we'll structure this report, because I think it's important for you to be able to really clearly see the two levels of recommendation. There is a piece that is about this sort of shifting of worldviews of the, you know, as the corporation moves in, how you center the experience of seniors, really everything else emanates from there, the policies, the practices, and the resource flows. But we do have very specific advice around some of this, the advice from tenants around how to tackle the question of services. And that is sort of in the space of what's in the unit, what's in the building, what's in the neighborhood. It does need, I think, to be negotiated. That I think the fundamental thing we want to communicate is there's no one plan for the entire city, that you need to have essentially like a framework for how you're going to determine what that looks like. And the service contracts can be negotiated much more locally according to the principles that are sort of developed there. So that's how I think we're going to work on presenting this. We want to get you as far down the path as we can with the information that we have, and really make sure we maintain loyalty to what we have heard. And we'll do whatever we can to really allow you to get to the practical. We are not giving you at the end of this a list of services, of course. We are giving you an approach if that's reasonable. So thank you, Brenda. I think it's really important to ensure that we're placing equal value on what are we talking about from a principal's perspective, and then how do you actually do it, and how you know it's working. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And if I can just jump, because I think it's another segue to the ISM report. And you're welcome to, is that okay, Lawrence? If I just actually make a comment, because I think it's important to actually think about these three reports, because one of the messages that we are hearing is that we do run a risk of having these siloed. And I see them actually integrated. It's hard to, I agree with Brenda, it's hard to speak about wellness without actually thinking about the services that are coming in. And even though, and our relationship, this is complex. I think that's what we're learning around this whole engagement process. So we also received, Councillor Fletcher actually made a really good recommendation at our last board meeting to understand the ISM role and the city's role in that. So ISM is about delivering services in the community, like libraries or socializations, health services, peer support services, and all of this make up the ISM. And through the senior services and long-term care of the city, they will provide oversight and evaluation for the ISM. So we're working really closely with the city on this. Longer term, the city will continue to look at if ISM is working for people. So this is the integrated service model, an annual evaluation based on tenant engagement with recommendations to our board and to STAC. We also heard the commitment, and we really appreciate that. Paul actually spoke to this report of supporting STAC through this process and bringing things all together. We also, we received some requests for more reports. Sophia mentioned the importance of pest management, and that you can't actually talk about engagement if you actually have a horrible situation happening in your own building and in your own unit, impacting your health and wellness. So we will be actually looking at those reports in the future as well. I'm wondering, Paul, if you have anything to add about the ISM report, or if there's any questions about that report that was also included in this. As you can see, it was actually a full meeting that we had, and it was a wonderful meeting for our first official meeting. Again, a gift to you, Tom, and your team that we actually have all of this on day 30.
So Linda, maybe just very, very briefly, I will be brief. It's just a pleasure working alongside, yourself and Carrie and everyone in this work. Our team is doing a great job. I know that I was presenting and doing some things, but the real credit for the work goes to, Jennifer and Andrea and many others who are doing this. To me, I think the really important stressor always when we talk about ISM is this isn't a clinical model. This is a broad set of objectives that we're trying to move forward. The first is around relationships of trust, and I actually put confidence in there as well. Trust and confidence that we together, the City of Toronto and the Seniors Housing Corporation, are going to build and continue to build the trust and the confidence of those we serve. The second piece is the better housing services. So just that core day-to-day operational piece of making sure that those buildings and those units are the best places possible to live. And then that third piece is recognizing the population and its needs, access to health and community services. And so that's that three-legged stool that I stress with our own team, and I would stress here with the board and with the tenants as well, is that that's in balance. So occasionally I hear things about, you know, just looking at the health services or this, and I say that's part of it, but it isn't the whole. And so I think the more we can continue to move on each of those core areas, the more successful we'll be. And happy to continue. You mentioned the piece around stack and things like that. This is transition. And so, as I think even it was mentioned today, you know, we're 30 days into this real formal transition. We need to keep this work happening in partnership, and there will be the correct time for the emphasis to be different people playing different roles. That's not in the first 30 days. So, and then ultimately, the city of Toronto is not going anywhere. We desperately want to ensure that we provide all of those supports and that you need to be successful as an organization, and we need to be successful as a city. So thanks again.
Thanks, Paul. And I would be remiss if I didn't actually at this point thank Arlene Howells and thank the board for actually giving us a big chunk of time about giving some updates on this. Arlene has been outstanding in supporting us in all three parts of this work, and helping me to understand how they all connect, and really getting to know our tenants in a very short period of time in a very compassionate, warm manner. And I'd like to welcome Wendy, who is no stranger to us, who is also going to be continuing to help us with this work. And Wendy, thank you also, because you've been actually playing a key role with all of these moving parts. So I'll pass it back over to you, Lawrence, in terms of the agenda.
Thank you, Linda. Next is item 16, report on communications and engagement. Wendy.
Sorry, can I just make one last comment?
Yeah.
I really want to highlight this issue of the pest management and the safety issues that were addressed in the consultations. I think those are two pivotal things that if we show some success in those areas, I think it helped a long way in building trust and relationship building. So it's often the devil's in the details, and if we don't get a handle on things that, you know, we'll have long-term work. I mean, the pest management's not going to change overnight, but that combined with really addressing the issue of safety, which is a real priority for me because I've lived this through family members of increasing worsening of safety. And it is linked into mental health and addiction. So we've got to come to grips with that. Otherwise, we'll have seniors living in fear of their own buildings. And we can't allow that to happen. That's all. Thank you.
Agree totally. And maybe we capture those in the action items as well, because I think that they are things that we don't want to lose track of. Thanks so much, Brenda, for that.
If we can't do those two, then what are we doing? You know?
Thank you. Wendy?
Thanks, Lawrence. I know Bill had mentioned in his deputation some things about this item. I just wondered if was there going to be another opportunity for him to depute on this, or had we considered that what he'd said earlier was his deputation on that? I didn't want to step over. I want to make sure Bill was heard.
Rajini?
Mr. Lohman, please go ahead.
No, I'm fine. Thank you very much. I'm waiting for number 20.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Okay. So I just wanted to, first, before I go into the updates, I just wanted to echo a couple of things that have been mentioned, and that's the integration of all of the previous items that were mentioned, and how much they link into communications and engagement, and how we have to make sure that these things are not looked at as separate entities, but they're intrinsically linked. And the idea of the community development perspective, I think I absolutely think that's a wonderful way of approaching it. So I just wanted to say those two things before I went into my update. So some of the things in the communications part especially have actually quite a few things in my report have already been sort of spoken to today, so I won't go into too much detail. but feel free to ask me any questions. I'll stop for questions, obviously. So we had 4 launch events that we had in the week of June 6th, one at each of our regional locations. And I want to do a big shout out to our staff and Arlene and the team, especially our staff who did such an amazing job getting those buildings ready and helping the set up and making our tenants feel very warm and welcomed, and all of our other guests as well, to all the guests who came out. Our tenants also had the chance, we had a tenant speaker at each of our events. We also had a tenant and a staff read the land and African ancestral acknowledgements, which was just beautiful to see, really, really enjoyable. And we had about 520 guests between the 4 events. For the launch, we also, on June 1st, the week of June 1st, we delivered 14,000 welcome guides. So every unit got a welcome guide, and we have translated versions available now as well. And 5 media outlets attended those welcome events, and we had tree plantings at the 4 events. One of them, we couldn't do an official picture because it was almost a flood. There was a lot of rain on day 1, fortunately, so the mayor didn't get to do the shovel. But other than that, it was a great success, and I think people were very happy. As you could see from the pictures too, it was very well attended. So in the presentations, you can see some of the social media increases that we've also experienced from that, but I won't sort of focus on that. We also on June 1st made sure all of our stakeholders had information about the transition and how it might impact them. And all of our staff, as we've mentioned, the T-shirts, and I see a few on screen today. All of our staff have their new T-shirts. They have a few other pieces of what we call collateral as well, so pins and new lanyards and things like that, so that you can now see the changeover of staff, and all of our posters in the buildings that we were able to change are changed over with the new logo and whatnot, to really give the face as much of a change as we could without, again, impacting tenants to the point where they're feeling uncomfortable. So we're also having one-on-one stakeholder meetings with Tom and, for example, the EMS chief and some of our counselors. And we started our listening tour on June 10th and have completed 4 sites so far. And I will say our average attendance is about 25 to 30% of the tenant population in the buildings. So I think that's really encouraging. So when I've added up the numbers and the number of units in the building, it's 25 to 30%, which is really exciting to see. And to Tom's point, we are hearing both similar messaging and divergent messaging between the different buildings. So I think that messaging of there are definitely similarities in what all of our tenants want, but also there's very unique challenges or needs or wants within different buildings that we need to figure out a way to address those differences as well in a meaningful way. So on June 3rd, we also had a check-in with our staff to make sure that the transition was going as expected for them and that they were also comfortable. So that's the main thrust of the communications update. Did anybody have questions about that before I go on to engagement? Thanks. And I just want to mention that something that we are continually it's continually brought up by tenants is, that we have to, although communications and engagement are linked, we have to be very careful not to call communications engagement.
Yeah.
That, otherwise it's not, it diminishes the meaningfulness behind engagement. And so, so I always try to really differentiate those, and we'll try to continue to do that in the reporting for this. If I have misplaced one or the other, I welcome comments on that so that I can make sure we are really, really, linking, but identifying the difference. So on the engagement report, it was requested that we had a bit of background on what the history of the tenant engagement system was within TSHC, sort of what we inherited, and what we're doing with that going forward. So in the engagement update, I've sort of provided their implementation process. They had four main areas where they did priority setting, model selection, and community action plan development, and then the tenant selection process, selection/election. The model that they had community representatives or building committees, and the building committees would then also select tenant representatives who would go to the regional level and city level tables to bring their building concerns forward. Before it was transitioned to us and paused, the regional and city level tables were never established. So we don't have any records of any of those meetings because it didn't happen. Any meetings that did have happened for building committees, that was not required to be reported, so we don't have that data. Unfortunately, on this, we were given a list of tenant representatives, and in a confidential document, we have provided that to our members. But the numbers originally were higher in the reports than what we have, because once we went and validated, some of the elections were held quite a while ago, and when we went through and validated, some of the names either had stepped down, had moved away, the emails were no longer valid, things like that. So our number went down quite a bit from the original numbers that we were given. So in the end, we've ended up with 40 buildings with community representatives or a building committee. We have 75 community representatives. That includes representatives who are from committees. And from the numbers we've been provided, but we haven't been given the names of committee members, there were apparently 292 committee members, on 24 building committees. That we haven't been able to validate because we weren't given the names. So that is still a challenge we're working through. I don't know if and when we will get all of those names, but we will do our best to connect with at least the leaders in different buildings to see if we can get more information on that. As far as the history of how tenant representatives were sort of informed about the process once they were elected or selected or appointed, not appointed, can't think of the word is slipping on me. It starts with an A, but when there's an election, but there's nobody else running against them.
Acclaimed.
Acclaimed. Thank you. Sure, it's not Friday. Yes. So a lot of there were acclamations as well, and we have where we did. I think for phase 3, we had some of that information. So and some of the information we provided confidentially, that information is in there where we've been provided with that, so you can tell what the process was to get us there. So there was a regional onboarding event online for each of the after the phases of each election. So there were 3 phases of the election, and then there was a seniors housing unit specific onboarding event as well. All leaders were presented with an orientation resource binder, and then on May 17th, we held a transition meeting for all of the community leaders. Basically letting them, thanking them for their contributions with TSHC, and then letting them know what their role might look like in the new corporation. And basically our message was, you are still, leaders in our communities, and we will continue to connect with you. The model will not be the model from TSHC, but we will be connecting with you on what a new model would look like. And we'll be going to the broader tenant community about that. But in the meantime, we will use them as our lead contacts in buildings about different items and engaging them as much as possible. We are creating email addresses, and I know this will be of interest to Bill. We are in the process with a vendor to finalize creating basically building specific community representative email addresses, so that if the leaders change, then both to protect privacy, and also if leaders change, then you don't have to keep changing the email address. So that will be a consistent contact point for each building for anybody who wants to reach their community representative. So so if we do have fall off and whatnot, that will be a stable piece that can continue on. So that's I believe only weeks away from being in action. At least last word I heard, that was the timing. So So that's a good piece of news there. And we are in the process of hiring the rest of our 4 engagement community services coordinators, and that should also further build on our engagement capacity. I'm not going to speak much to the tenant action funds because I know that's later on the agenda, but that's, we know, is a priority, and we have communicated with, we have heard from tenants and will be engaging with them on that process. So, but I'll leave that more to the upcoming report for that. So just to quickly highlight what our upcoming things are. So we have the listening tour. We expect that to run possibly into early 2023. Right now we're, where possible, we're trying to schedule 3 per week, wherever Tom's schedule will allow. It's a lot. So what we do is we go to each building for 2 hours. So we do a 30-minute meet and greet with the staff and a tour of the building before we meet with the tenants, and then it's 90 minutes with the tenants. We are looking at where we will can bring in translators wherever possible, interpreters, and how that might look in different buildings. And we are also going to be holding sessions with other stakeholders as well, and our staff, of course. But tenants are, as Bill mentioned, they're our primary stakeholder. So they've been our first on our list, but we are starting to meet with staff very shortly as well. So then something we're going to do with that, and I think that was kind of asked earlier or alluded to earlier, is what will we do with all of this information? And I think, we're collecting themes, but also identifying by building some of the differences as we go along. So our senior services coordinators are great. They've been attending. They've both been doing the introductions and been taking notes. And then afterwards they stay and take any work orders. So if there's specific issues that tenants haven't been able to address, and that might not be, this might not be the right forum for that, there's still the opportunity for them to stay after with the senior services coordinator. What we have also found is, there have been the odd person who hasn't known about their senior services coordinator, or perhaps there's a new person in the role, and this has actually provided a great opportunity for them to get to know them better, and also what services and supports they can provide. So it's been a great help in that area. So on the STAC report, as was mentioned earlier, our plan is to take this to STAC and the tenant leaders, and to try and get this more focused. And I think, with all the great engagement that's been happening through the STAC report and through Health Commons, I think we're taking a lot of lessons learned and guidance from those consultations to be able to do a better job, to do the best job possible moving forward. And then, of course, our policies, I think Mary alluded to this earlier as well, that we're looking to take our policies and procedures and prioritize them with tenants, especially the tenant-facing ones, to make sure we're identifying the ones that are top priorities for them for us to adjust first. And I know use of space and tenant action funds were definitely top of list. So, and I think that was the update. Did anybody have any questions?
Brenda here.
Yeah.
It sounds like to me there wasn't much of a tenant engagement system in place for Toronto Community Housing. I mean, you mentioned here that certain things are not implemented. The basic steps were started, but so in a sense, we're carrying over some stuff, but in a sense, it's almost a clean slate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think they were in the middle of implementing.
To be nice about how I'm putting this, because of course I could use other words and other language and other occasions, but so I think it should liberate us a little bit, that while we know there may be some bad feelings and feelings of relationship and trust, I take some comfort in this, realizing, well, really in a sense we are starting fresh.
Yeah.
I think that could be a good theme, that, we're here, we're different.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be extraordinarily different, but just we're here, we're different, we're listening in different ways. And, I mean, this stuff isn't rocket science once you start to apply it properly.
Yeah. Brenda, there was always the sense that the previous system was very process heavy and just wasn't user friendly at all.
Yeah.
So no one's going to be sad to see it go.
Yeah. Well, that's always the downside of too heavy a process-oriented approach. I mean, I'm appreciative of process. I tend to be quite intolerant and impatient with it. That's my bias and my hang-up. But I think we need to still ground it in some very practical things.
Yeah. There was just the sense that staff, and it may not be entirely fair, but there was much more concern about KPIs than there was about actually serving the tenants.
Yeah. All them KPIs, those metrics and
Yeah.
matrix.
Yeah. Tenants?
Moving forward.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Nope. I'll hand it back to Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy.
Sorry, Lawrence. I just wanted to speak to two things that had been brought up by Bill Lohman. He mentioned the community rooms, that not all of them were open, and we are connecting with staff to make sure that they are open because they are supposed to be open. So, but we have heard in a few cases that that either the fobs are not working or that there may have been some misunderstanding somewhere, and they should be open. And we have also heard from some tenants that we have been doing engagement on all of our use of space agreements before programming goes in, but we understand that with COVID, the transition and whatnot, some of our partners may have a misunderstanding and may have been using the rooms still without having gone through that process, and we're trying to remedy that as well. And for any tenants who do hear about that, we welcome you reaching out to us. You could actually reach out. I'll offer communications at Toronto Seniors Housing, and I can pass it forward. Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, sorry. I should know our email. So communications at Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, and I will forward that on to the staff to get those items remedied, because yeah, it's a concerning thing that we're hearing, and but yeah, that it's in our document because that's what's supposed to be happening. But if it's not happening on the ground, yeah, we'd like to hear about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Next will be item 17, Corporate Governance and Human Resources Committee report. Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the privilege of chairing the June meeting of the committee, and we had a very extensive review of management's proposals with respect to the organizational structure and direction, the matters that were discussed earlier in this meeting. In our review of the proposals, we put a particular focus on the importance of having an internal audit function. It's something that the members of the committee thought should be there from the very beginning. And I'm just delighted to see that management has responded by including an internal audit function in the proposals that were put before the meeting earlier in this meeting. We also spent a fair amount of time looking at client-facing functions with a view to satisfying ourselves that they had been appropriately provided for. In the end, after a very extensive discussion, we took comfort in Tom's view that the proposals would enable Toronto Seniors Housing to carry out its mandate in an effective and an efficient manner. And it was on that basis that we made the recommendation to the board. And that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Warren. Next, item 18. It's the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee report. That will be me. The committee held its first meeting on June 27th. Interim finance lead Norm introduced the new finance team and presented the financial results up to May 31st and also the forecast for the fiscal year ending December 31st. Norm will be presenting these items to the board next. The next item is item 19. Norm.
Thank you, Lawrence. I wanted to speak to the financial results, sort of the past and the future. So what you see in front of you is the past. So that's the January to May 31st, and that's all of the costs that were incurred up to that point. And then obviously starting June 1, we are live with the Holmes Yardy system. So these financial results, both the statement of operations and the statement of financial position, will be transferred over to and entered into the Holmes financial system. So through the first 5 months of the year, we incurred costs of about 2.1 million and recognized a similar amount of revenue. We, on our statement of financial position, while we have a lot of cash, we also have about $1 million worth of payables, which have now been dispersed through the bank. And we paid $300,000 for the insurance for the period June to the end of October, and that's set up as a prepaid expense. So these are the financial results that are being transferred over, and Vince, who you met earlier, and Tulo, who is on the line as our manager of financial planning and reporting, will be entering this information onto the Holmes Yardy system and then transacting from there forward. The second part of my conversation is really about the future. And we have begun the transactions between community housing and ourselves that are in compliance with the transition agreement and the service delivery agreement. As we've mentioned before and talked a little bit about at the audit committee, we don't have a lot of working capital. And so we worked with the city and with phenomenal response, and thank you very much to the city. They advanced all of our June to December funding, and it's now in our bank account. And that will provide us with some working capital while we work through with the city the need for a letter of guarantee, which we hope to get in the fall, which we then can work with the bank and then have some working capital support through a line of credit. And the 4.8 million, which was the funds that we anticipated that we would need for the period June to December, we are currently in the midst of updating that to reflect the changes that the board saw this morning. And while we will be communicating our results of that to the city in the next couple of weeks, and we'll get back to the board in September with their response, I think the early view, with the exception of any COVID costs and costs associated with phase 2 of the Holmes implementation, which is the elimination of IT impediments, it looks like the 4.8 million will be sufficient. And then we will, as we determine what any COVID costs are in conjunction with the city and with community housing and how that will be dealt with, and how, what our resource plan will be to enter into a lease agreement sometime in the future with community housing, which will likely require resources. Then we'll layer that in to our planning. But with excluding those two amounts, it's my view that we probably have sufficient funds of the 4.8 and carryover funds from the past to keep us whole through the end of December. So that's sort of the view of the past and the view of the future. I understand earlier in the meeting, Vince was introduced and Tulo is on the line as our manager of financial planning. And they are 2 of 5 that we've hired. And as my final comment, I'd like to thank the board. This is my last meeting as an interim lead and on the board, and I will be sort of moving into the background through the month of July and August. And it's been a real pleasure working with you. And I know you've got a lot on your plate, but you will do a great job. So thank you for the opportunity to work with you all. Be happy to answer the questions.
Thank you, Norm, for your great work. Really enjoyed working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norm.
Thank you, Norm. Yes. Who's going to be the new Norm?
Yes.
We got that.
Interim.
It's Vince? Okay.
Yes, yes.
All right. Not that you could ever be replaced, Norm.
Do we have any questions for Norm? Okay, if we don't, that will be next will be item 20, operations report and the tenants fund distribution policy grant. And I think we have Bill Lohman deputation.
Would you like Bill to go ahead first, or?
Grant?
Good morning, through the chair. So would you like the deputation before I give a brief overview of these two reports?
Yeah, that could be
fine
better.
with that.
Yeah.
Lohman, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rajni, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to speak in favor of the move to move the transition funding distribution policy to seniors control. There have been continuing many issues with the policies from Toronto Housing as they've existed. And I believe that it's a great move to begin reconnecting tenants with communities this summer. And it also will be able to start communities recognizing that they need to have a collective voice going forward. And as Director Paris alluded to earlier, there's a question that while there's a lot to work on with the tenant engagement, more comprehensive tenant engagement model and developing this, what is in place in the interim to engage seniors while this process is going on? Tenant engagement kind of requires an ongoing effort and influence to keep it motivated, especially at this point. I do want to say that that different buildings and different leaders are engaged and take different approaches. At Saranac, we kind of realized that the overall goal here is to create what was somebody mentioned earlier, the asset-based community development. And I think honestly that when this whole plan was put together, it was the wrong asset that was looked at. The city was looking at the entirety of the city, what they needed as an asset, and that asset were agencies. And so there's a conflict here in housing because that's the same approach that got put here when the asset here are the tenants and not the agencies. And so I think that's where we're having this real kind of issue and need to be integrating and working this together. But at Saranac, we're trying to apply this community development model. And I've been working with the Red Cross for some time now. And we were also involved with Baycrest Interprofessional Care Team pilot a couple of years back before the COVID. So we've been developing a neighbors program that we're starting here at Saranac. And we were able to bring out about 40 tenants just for a quick meet and greet for an hour or so to start to re-engage tenants in the, in that sort of community dialogue. And it's very helpful because it's a series of 3 meetings, and our second meeting, after just the tenants meeting,
Losing him.
Bill, we're having trouble hearing you. It's Tom. Bill, we're having trouble hearing you.
Sorry, is that better?
That's better. Yeah.
Stay close to the microphone.
Yes, it's phones, fancy phones. But anyway, so this meet and greet that we're putting together, we did our first of 3. The second one is going to include representatives from our support agencies. We're going to have representatives from Baycrest here. We're going to bring in representatives from Battelle, so that there's an opportunity for these agencies to actually start to meet and mingle with our communities, so that we can start building the framework for collaborative efforts. And so this is just one way that we're able to start putting these things together. Again, they all need support. And the one thing that I've learned from speaking with the agencies, both here in the West Side and with agencies I've dealt with on the East, is that because of the new funding models that have been put in by the province, it makes everybody fish out of the same pond. And what happens is that it's the bigger fish who are getting these grants.
Yeah.
Smaller agencies who have been the ones who are actually providing service, like funding recreation programs or funding this building, they want exercise programs. Well, those small agencies that had funding to do that no longer have that funding.
We're losing you again, Bill. Bill, we're losing you again.
Well, that must be my phone. Anyway, I just think that this is a very smart move, and it is a beginning. And we need to consider that going forward, we just need to keep in mind that this is going to require ongoing effort and influence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Any questions for Bill? So Grant, please go ahead.
Thank you. So through the chair, I'd like to present 2 reports today. I'll go through them quickly at an overview and take any questions one at a time. So the first one is the Enforcement of Evictions Restart Report. And just to give a bit of context, during the COVID period, when we were the Seniors Housing Unit and part of Toronto Community Housing, a moratorium on evictions for arrears was implemented in late 2020. Within TSHC, earlier, prior to transition, an evictions prevention policy for arrears was adopted, and it was modeled or adapted on the TSHC policy, or the policy we had already been following when we were part of TSHC. Earlier this year, TSHC undertook a process as part of their restart post-COVID, or coming out of some of the COVID restrictions period. They restarted the enforcement of evictions for arrears. We, in our work in supporting tenants, have a series of different support mechanisms through our senior support coordinators to work with tenants when they get into arrears. There are a number of aspects in the process that are part of the evictions prevention policy, where our goal, of course, is to help stabilize tenancies, and for tenants that are in arrear situations to ultimately be in a path to a successful tenancy. And we work closely with tenants to do that within our own team in the initial stages of when a tenant finds themselves in arrears. And then the OACH gets involved as well when those cases are not resolved. Ultimately, when we get to a stage where the cases have not been resolved, the OACH has been engaged, and a recommendation to proceed to the landlord and tenant board, is received, we then take these forward to LTV for consideration, always looking to try to get a mediated agreement in place. At times, this is not possible. And over the course of the COVID period, we continued to move forward through the steps of this process with tenants that were in arrears. And in very few cases, we went to the order stage, but we never enforced the orders because of the moratorium that was in place at the time. Now that TSHC previously restarted enforcement of the evictions for arrears, they excluded the seniors cases at that time because we were in the just prior to transition period. So we did not enforce any of those orders pre-June 1st. In the report before you, you'll see a summary of the orders and the amounts for the orders that are currently before us for the remainder of the year, and also the ones that have now lapsed earlier in this year. Once an order has actually lapsed in terms of its timeline, we cannot enforce it, and we have to start over again in that particular process. The report before you is to advise and inform the board that we are now planning to proceed on the restart of evictions in these particular scenarios going forward. And it's in alignment to the existing eviction prevention policy. This is already these are already actions that are contained within the scope of that. I will also advise and update the board that in the case of these situations where an eviction ultimately comes to light, there are and needs to be an opportunity to help support the tenants even as they are leaving tenancy with us. So there is a soft landing procedure. There are processes where we work with supports to ensure as best we can and coordinate when they're leaving our tenancy. And in this particular case, we also continue to work with tenants to try to find solutions and resolve these situations, even once we're at this stage. So we don't give up on trying to find a resolution. I will advise that in the report, we have 8 cases there that for the remainder of this year. Some of them, actually 2 of them, it's looking like we will not have to enforce at this stage. One of them, I'll advise it appears to be there's an abandonment case, and we're looking into the follow-up on that. The tenant may have deceased, is our belief. And in another case, we've been able to work with the public trustee guardian and come to a resolution we will not have to enforce. So before you for information of this report, and I'll take any questions.
Just a process question. So when a person gets behind in arrears, how quickly and how early is it identified?
Within the first 30 days, we start initial steps to communicate with the tenant to start the process. So we have activities that our team will take within the first 30 days to essentially reach out to the tenant, to advise them they're in arrears, and to start to work towards resolving that as soon as possible. We'll start, if we get past the 60-day mark, we will engage OACH. OACH will then work with them for up to 45 days. So there's a process where our goal is to work with the tenants in these situations as soon as we can, and also be somewhat sensitive to the fact that tenants in some cases have different scenarios and situations that they're facing. So to be supportive of them through the process to help come to a resolution where there's an opportunity for them to be, their housing to be maintained in a stable way. So our goal is to reach them as soon as possible, and we do start the actions within the first 30 days. And that's through a combination of our regional teams and our senior services coordinators that you've heard about in this meeting that are on site in the buildings.
And when you talk about repayment, is it partial payment? Like, how, do people get set up with their regular monthly payment and then a percentage of the arrears added on every month? Is that?
That's correct. So we'll look to come up with a repayment agreement that is reasonable and within, taking into consideration the particular circumstances and situation for each tenant, so that it's manageable and won't put them into a more difficult situation. The cases before you in this report, for example, have multiple months of unpaid rent.
And is there are there 2 or 3 or 4 main reasons why the arrears still persist? Is it mental health issues? Is it the health issues that they're sickly or in hospital? Like, what are the reasons that people are not paying their rent?
Yeah, so there are different reasons why people don't pay their rent. Thankfully, so broadly across our portfolio, we have about just under 1,000 tenants that are in an arrears scenario. So still a significant number of people, but about 1,000 are in some degree of arrears, and over 50% of them are in what we call managed arrears, where they have repayment agreements in place. The others are in situations where we're working with them to try to get to that. Why do they end up in the arrears situations? One of the things, and it kind of leads back to some of the more integrated conversations earlier in this meeting, is we do find that as people age and are faced with different challenges, health related, for example, when one particular challenge or vulnerability becomes more prominent or dominant, we often find that it manifests itself in other things, such as not following through on remembering to pay the rent, or inadvertently circumstances. So it's about looking at the tenant holistically and trying to be sensitive to the fact of what situation they're in, and working to be reasonable about coming up with a solution so that they can maintain their tenancy. And I think as we go forward with the future of some of the processes that we are have started to implement through the integrated service model. So for example, a tenant needs assessment process, we're going to get more detailed understanding and information to help us to analyze in more depth the situations that are potentially causing arrears, and then more broadly, how we can support tenants in their health and wellness aspects.
Good, thank you. And you said 1,000 people are in arrears.
Approximately.
Yeah. Is that within the range? Is it high? Is it low? I have no idea what the comparisons are. I mean, Tom, you were coming from Hamilton, so I don't know what your experience is there, but you know.
I think you're on mute, Tom.
I was just going to say it's well within the range of acceptable if you're comparing it to Hamilton.
Okay.
But just when I'm looking at this process, from what I see, it starts early. There's very strong kind of and directed intervention. There's various stages, third parties looking at this. So to me, it's a very robust process.
Yeah.
And very comparable. And I would say, don't forget that 1,000. I would probably know those might be people with 1 or 2 months in arrears, right? And that's part of when you start to look at your metrics. Kind of what percentage are in 30 days, 60 days. But what you're seeing at the end of the day, there's like 8 or 9, right, out of thousands of units. So good work is being done and to stay on top of this.
Okay. Good to know. I just want to know what the range is before we start evicting people. And these evictions were on hold because of COVID. So now, because of COVID, seemingly into the next phase, we're going back to the procedures.
That's correct.
Yeah. Oh, I hate evicting people. All right. And actually, where do they go? I mean, there's no shelter space. So practically speaking, when we evict them, does that mean we have no obligation to find them alternate housing?
We will work to try to help find an opportunity for them to soft land into a shelter. So we do work to try to find those opportunities to support the tenants, or with other supports through agencies as they depart our tenancy. So
but if you're evicted and you have a record of that eviction, then that means you can't apply for other subsidized housing.
This is correct. There are that is an issue that they will face going forward because of the
so it's
database that's maintained by the province on evictions. Yes.
So it's like a domino effect. You screw up here, then you're screwed forever.
Yes. So our goal in all of this is to obviously to prevent the evictions from happening, and to do as much as we can. In these particular scenarios, we worked through and exhausted all of the different options and considerations to try to resolve these situations.
Yeah. And you're probably getting into some cognition issues and early difficult behaviors due to undiagnosed dementia.
There could be other factors at play in some of these situations. Yes.
Yeah, and just to jump in, I think for our board, actually intention early notification. I want people in the first 30 days, and that we're actually resolving things as much as possible and understanding that hopefully very few that actually end up with actually being evicted, or that there's some agreement. So we'll be looking at these metrics closely.
Good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I just want to add in the chat, Jenzi and Louis made a comment that if even post eviction, if a repayment plan is put into place, then the person is eligible for to rent. If that's not correct, Jen, please clarify.
Say that again. If the person has a plan
Jen,
in place.
Go ahead, Jen.
I can jump in, sorry. So if a tenant is evicted for arrears or has past arrears, what they need to do to become eligible for RGI housing again in Ontario is to have an active payment plan with their past landlord.
How realistic is that? Do people have payment plans with the place that they left?
All the time. So if they apply for RGI housing, they will be told they're currently ineligible because of past arrears, and then they very often will contact the past landlord and enter into a payment plan so that they become eligible. So it's part of the business process of the application for subsidized housing in the city.
Okay.
Wendy, you wanted to talk?
I was going to bring up exactly what Jen said, because my role at the city, I worked on the province-wide arrears database, so I was aware of that, but Jen covered it, so that's why I took my hand down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Grant, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
If through the chair, if it's all right, I'll move to the second report on the tenants funds distribution policy.
Yeah.
So I'll just give a quick overview on this, and this report is in front of you today for approval. So as has been discussed in this meeting, and something that we also recognize as a priority is an opportunity for tenants to have access to funds to support different types of initiatives in their communities. Prior to our move over to TSHC on June 1st, when we were part of TSHC brought forward a new tenants funds distribution policy to their April board meeting. And this policy, we've taken, similar to how other TSHC policies we've looked to adapt for use at TSHC, we have the recommendation in front of you today is to adapt this policy for an interim period over the next 6 months to allow us to be able to fund tenant-led initiatives, support tenants in things like community gardens and things they would like for their gardens, barbecues, events, initiatives within their buildings, to allow us to have a process to follow to consider those applications and to actually support those initiatives. The process that is in front of you has gone through the sort of a degree of analysis and process within TSHC. We recognize and acknowledge that moving forward, a future process for tenants fund distribution or how to support tenants getting funded to do and support activities and initiatives in their communities will be part of a broader tenant engagement system conversation, and something that the board will consider more holistically going forward. In the interim and in the summer period now, there's a lot of interest from tenants to have activities and initiatives. Also coming out of COVID, a lot of interest for that as well. And we'd really like to try to support that. We did also bring forward this proposal on taking this existing policy and implementing it on an interim basis for the next 6 months to stack the Senior Tenant Advisory Committee last week to have a discussion there. There was support for us moving forward with this, but also some considerations, which we've highlighted a few of in the staff report in front of you, about how to look at it going forward in terms of things like the amount that should be allocated for the different initiatives, ensuring that there's tenant education, tenant reps, the staff as well to support this, ensuring that the types of expenses that are eligible will be reviewed. So there are different things that I think in the longer term need to be looked at, and I think should be looked at. In the interim, though, we feel confident that we can work within the existing policy and supporting processes that are in front of you today, with support from our team working with tenant reps and the tenants in the communities, to when they bring forward applications. We acknowledge and recognize that the process that is in front of you has some opportunities for more efficiencies in the long run, for example. So the complexity of the application form and whatnot, for example, could be simplified. And there are other opportunities, I think, if we look at the funding approach or the amounts, so we could look at budgets and things like that going forward in 2023 as well. So there are opportunities for, you know, to look at this from a senior specific lens and the TSHC lens as well. But in front of you, we would look for your support in adopting this policy with the supporting procedures on an interim basis to allow tenants to have access to these funds very shortly. And we will be looking to implement this with the board approval starting in the next 2 weeks. And I'll take any questions.
How quickly is there a turnaround on decision making if tenants come with an idea? How quickly can they have it considered and the money released?
We will need an initial 3-week period to get the committee in place starting in July. And once that's in place, we'll be looking at applications monthly and we'll have a 2-week turnaround. If there's a particular application that you know, tenants bring forward with shorter timelines, we're going to look to try to support as many of these as we can going forward, ensuring they do follow the appropriate process and review with the committee that will be formed, a joint committee between staff and tenants.
And the number of pages in the application, there have been complaints about that. Has that been changed?
We did not. So just for context, because we didn't feel that it would be appropriate to make any significant changes to this policy without going through a wholesome process for engagement and review and consultation, we did not change anything in the policy or process other than you know, going out and working with our senior services coordinator. So we did not shorten the application form at this time. What we have said we would do, and we will do this, is to ensure that our team, our senior services coordinators, will work with tenants and tenant reps to help them to complete those applications and make it as easy as possible. There is some opportunities for efficiencies in the long term in terms of how that application form is designed, but we didn't feel, given the short timelines and trying to get this in place, that we would necessarily change the form right now, but we would put in place supports to make sure it's as easy as possible. Our goal is not to make this onerous because it does seem a bit daunting when it's a 12-page application. A number of pieces in that application could probably be simplified, and we will look at that in the long term, working with STAC and other opportunities to consult with tenants on this process.
Can I say, with all due respect, I can't see how you're going to get funds out this summer if you've got 3 weeks before you get a committee and then you're saying a 2-week turnaround. So you're looking now until August before any money gets distributed. So I personally cannot support this. I know you have consulted with STAC. We've talked about this for months. There's been almost a bit of a delay on releasing any funds because of, I guess, some hesitancy about transition. And I personally cannot support this. I think it should be a 2-page application. I think I would review even the need to have 8 signatures. I think it's far too onerous and bureaucratic. I think the time frame is unacceptable. Current time frame, although you're saying going forward it will be 2 weeks. And the dollar amount, I seriously want us to raise it right away from 1,000. I personally would go to 5,000 per building, but if not, then 2,500 building, and that will show some goodwill and some good intention. And similarly with a simplified application form, it should be no more than 2 pages. There's no reason for it to be longer than 2 pages. So, you know, I understand the thing about being in transition and people want, we've been using that reasoning for the whole year. And I think this is something that's small scale enough that, you know, this is an easy low-hanging fruit win for our tenant engagement and relationship building. And I'd like to view it as a low-hanging fruit that can be easily done. So I personally cannot support this and would like to suggest that we, with some urgency, change the application process change the dollar amount, and change the time frame to show some goodwill to our tenants.
So my understanding is that there are events are still proceeding, right? Like we still,
Well, that's not clear to me. I'm reading.
Wendy, is there not, there are events that are happening, right? That there will be funds for.
So just to clarify, so there are some events that are proceeding, but they're being funded through a different way. They're not tenant funded events per se. They're events that we're funding through the tenant reimbursement aspect of another policy we have within TSHC. So these are for specific proposals from tenants who might want to have funding for their gardens, to run some kind of a club, to have a barbecue, things like that. And
that's coming out of the tenant funding or this other funding?
That would come out of this. We're looking to also try to support some of that from the tenant reimbursement policy that's associated with an existing policy.
And tenant reimbursement policy is linked to what policy?
So this is actually where we would fund it through TSHC funds, an event like a barbecue or something.
Yeah.
And you say reimbursement, so that's presuming the tenants pay it up front and then they're reimbursed.
In some cases, that might be what happens. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not happy with that. So
we would like to actually this particular policy before you, and acknowledging your feedback. There are absolutely opportunities to make this a more effective application process. Look at the funding from how much money could be available, and also to understand how it could be applied. Our concern with the delay in that is that to go through a holistic review of those factors and return to the board would require more time than we are right now, and I understand that though. So that is why we were bringing it forward now. This particular policy was only approved a month ahead of transition at TSHC and had never really been fully implemented prior to transition. Yeah,
I understand that. So if we look at my greater goal here, which is I want to win here. I want, we talk about 100-day plan and all this. We're all about process and meeting and engagement. I'm sick of it. I want something practical and specific that we can do. This is something within our control that's modest. It will show goodwill. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why, if you want to have a barbecue, you fill out a 12-page application. There is no process in the world that will convince me we need a 12-page form. So my goal here is low-hanging fruit. Let's get one victory here to show some goodwill. You might not want to go to 5,000, but I think minimum 2,500. I'll compromise on that. I want a 2-page application form, which I'm absolutely certain staff can manage to do that and in a fairly quick manner. You have processes in place in terms of approval, whether it's by the building manager, whether it's by the coordinators. I don't want to delay this any further while we all talk about how we're going to do this process. It's and as I say, I will not approve this. I will not approve this as a recommendation. And I think it behooves us to look at something that we can practically do simply and quickly, so people can have an enjoyable summer, can have some events, some gardening, some chairs, some barbecues, whether it's equipment for games, whatever. I don't really even care, as long as it's something people can tap into.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
So if I recall, it's $1,000 that Wendy just, it's $1,000 per event, right? So it's not per building. So it's per event.
Is it 1,000 per event? I read.
That's correct.
That's correct. So
per application or initiative.
So I don't think we have to worry about that dollar amount right now.
So there's no limit on the dollars per building.
Right.
Am I correct on that, Grant? There's no limit.
So yeah, so thank you. So through the chair, so you can have there's no limit on the dollars per building. The $1,000 is per application or initiative, and you can submit multiple applications or initiatives.
Okay.
And would it be something? I'm not sure if I could put this forward for consideration if the board would be open to approving this policy, but with a resolution that says with a simplified application form of no more than 2 pages, which we could work on in short order post this meeting. Maybe that's a consideration that you would be open to. We would obviously not have time to go through a broad consultation with the tenant population on that particular aspect, but I think it would be welcomed, and we could work maybe with Stack on that to make sure that it hits the right level. We do acknowledge that it is a complex application form, and we always look to it.
In all our reports today, people have identified this as an issue for them, right? I don't think you need to consult with people on how to do an actual form per se. It's 2 pages. It's the purpose of the event, the contact name, what you want to use it for. That's it. There's no rhyme or reason to ask any additional information. Okay. And I just really, really want, in terms of building relationship building and trust and showing some goodwill, to me, this is a simple thing that we can do right away. And you tell people, come and apply. We have a simplified application that will mean something to people, because it means that someone's
It sounds
listened.
like Grant has agreed to that. So I wonder, just because I also would want to make sure that our tenant reps actually are good with this recommendation. I wouldn't want to, as a board, to put something in place that we actually delay getting even the $1,000 per event. And I appreciate, Grant, that you're willing to actually change the application process. I don't want our board to actually get in the way of this actually not rolling out. I wonder if Carrie or Jim, if you have any thoughts.
The application process is awful. It truly is, and kudos to Grant for acknowledging that. But is there some way you could combine Brenda's request for a reduced application with the committee that will be reviewing the applications?
For sure. What the behind this sort of the process when an application comes in, it would need to have sufficient information in it so that the committee that's reviewing the application can holistically assess that in light of what's in front of them. So yes, it would definitely mean working with the committee that's struck to make sure that's understood.
Less officious or something like that.
I think what it is a couple of aspects to the application form today. So for example, the current application process requires a minimum of 8 tenants to sign to show support for the initiative, so that it's not particularly a one-off type thing that is not necessarily supported in the broader community. That maybe could be looked at, for example. The form today has a few different segments of fairly significant space to articulate what's the application about, how do you measure success, things like that could probably be consolidated into a simpler view. So there are opportunities to definitely make that form simpler, and our commitment is to have the senior services coordinators work with tenants and tenant groups and tenant leaders to help make that process as simple as possible. Template where it makes sense, things like that, so that there isn't, it's not too onerous. But if the board is supportive of us taking a review and a quick review and simplifying the form, and working with the table that will be established, and we could start the establishment of the table as soon as Monday in terms of reaching out to tenants to help with that. Then I think we're in a better position to be able to support tenant activities and initiatives as soon as possible. And also we would look at retroactively supporting any applications in the period post today, so that if things were actually happening over the next 2 weeks, that we'd still have a way to make sure they got dealt with.
And I know everything takes time, but why do we need 3 weeks to get the committee going?
Well, it's basically to reach out. So we're going to go to former members of the Tenant Action Fund tables that existed pre-COVID, and we were going to ask them if they would resume. So we just need a bit of time to reach out to those people, make sure they're comfortable to resume, and coordinate getting them together. So that's why we put 3 weeks, to be able to get the communications that we would plan to do would start next week. So we'd actually get information out to tenants next week about the fact that this process is now available, and the application and how that would kind of work, and then they could start to submit their applications as soon as possible.
Sounds good.
And we can look to try to shorten the timeline to get the table going as well. We just want to be cognizant that we need a bit of time to get people engaged and be cognizant of their schedules and whatnot too. That's all.
Jim?
That sounds good.
I can support that. I can support.
Can't hear you, Jim.
What I can support it. Are you still having problem hearing me?
No, now you're okay.
Now you're okay.
Yes, I can support it with a shortened form. So that we can get this done as soon as possible. Because I think it is really important, like as Brenda stressed, it's important that we do something concrete to show that we're moving forward.
Thank you, Jim. So Tom and Grant will go ahead with the amended motion.
Yes.
Simplified form.
So would we simplify the form in the resolution? I have a revised resolution, which I hope is acceptable. It says, be resolved that the board approve the tenant funds distribution policy appended to this report for an interim period through December 31st, subject to a simplification of the application process.
No, it needs more than that. I'm not happy. That's too loose. I would specify the subject to a reduced application package completed by the earliest possible time, communication with tenants as to the availability of the funds, and the formation of the action fund committee as soon as possible. Because I'm not even happy that I'm saying I'm supporting the policy pending these, but I'll concede that point if I have to. But I want some specificity in the resolution so we can be certain we can track this. Sorry, guys, to be persistent on this, but we've got to have something somewhere to show some level of. Everyone's asking tenants all these things and all these consultations and all this engagement. And, you know, all my life I've been involved with engagement and consultation as Black and often the only Black. And you know, you get tired of being consulted and then there's no action. So this is a small area where we can show some action and some goodwill. We did listen to you, whether it's Health Commons or whether it's the engagement committee of the board, whether it's whatever. We did listen.
What was your last addition, Brenda? I have the communications to the tenants of the act regarding access to the funds.
Availability of the funds.
Okay.
And the formation of the, what's it called? Tenant Action Fund Committee? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, it's a group of tenants and
folks that you work with
that work together on reviewing the applications.
Yeah. Yeah. And creation of that action fund committee.
Yep. Just on that action fund committee, were we going to solicit representatives so that we had 8 people solicit, or are we able to, in order to expedite this, are we able to ask, 8?
Oh, through the chair, in response, Tom, our plan was to approach the previous tenant action fund committee members in our buildings.
So we just want to get that 8 as quick as we want to get that 8 representative and as quickly as we can. Okay.
Yeah.
We would try to, when we'd reach out to them as soon as we knew this policy was approved. So basically on Monday to hopefully get them together as soon as possible. That 3-week timeline was to get them together and have the first meeting. Maybe we could do it in 2 weeks or even sooner. I just want to highlight that our goal is to get that as soon as possible as well.
We can do that in less than 3 weeks.
Yeah. You can maybe even sex it up by calling it's our post-COVID, let's all come out of the cold with post-COVID planning, come and apply for community action funds or, give a little sexy messaging there.
Just through the chair, I just want to acknowledge that we really are hopeful and appreciative of the board working on how we can get this to move forward. because and I think the board, this is something that's really important to tenants, and so appreciate whatever we can do to move this forward.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Grant.
Let me know if the attached, if what I'm about to show works, or do you want me to repeat it before I put it up on screen?
Put it up on the screen so we can read it. Okay, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah. Is it acceptable to everyone?
Yeah, if it is acceptable.
Yeah, that's fine. You're good, Monique.
Yeah.
I'm just listening to what you said.
We need a mover.
Don't leave us.
Moved by Jim and seconded by
Brenda.
All in favor? Carried. I think it's time would anyone like to discuss any other matter, or it's just adjournment? Okay, it's time for adjournment. I need a motion to that effect.
So moved, Carrie.
Moved by Carrie and
seconded by Brenda.
Seconded by Brenda. All in favor? Yeah, carried. Thank you very much, all of you.
Do we have another board meeting in the summer?
Thank you.
No, there's no board. The next one is planned for September.
Oh, so we are taking the summer off because we didn't last year.
I think you have a board orientation scheduled maybe for August. I think there was some discussion regarding that.
Okay, so and if there's a need, do you have any need for the board to meet during the summer? I don't know.
I know the QTE committee will be meeting over the summer to keep their work moving forward, and we always have the option to call a board meeting if required. So
okay.
we have no shortage of work.
Yes, no, I know that, and I don't want to delay staff if they're needing to get decisions from us.
Right. No. If we would, we would call a special meeting if required. Yeah.
Okay. All right, I have.
All right.
Okay then.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Good weekend, everyone.
Yes, have a good long weekend.
Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful staff support.
Yes.
And
Arlene.
yes,
Roshni.
I know we're gonna miss you guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care
Thank
of
you,
yourself.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Grant.